I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool ruins, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom. From Richard Wright's Black Boy.
The book is The Warmth of Other Suns. You're listening to part 2. This is Lit Society. Let's get lit!
This is Alexis.
And this is Kari.
And you're listening to Lit Society, a show about books and drama.
Yes.
So, Kari.
Yeah.
How was your week?
It was good. You know, I'm not on lockdown yet. I know a lot of, but it's weird because I'm looking at my phone at work and I'm just watching my life be canceled. One event after another.
Yeah.
Will there even be a summer? But
surely this will be over before then, right?
I really hope so. We have a friend coming in from the UK.
We do.
This fall. Well, I think it's still summer. So
hopefully, because if that ban is official, weren't they talking about?
Yeah. So the UK and Ireland, right? Mm-hmm. This week, it's a no-go into the US. So yeah, we'll see what happens. What about you? How you been?
Oh, I've been pretty good. At work, we're kind of planning to just be ready just in case we need to. I love that from home.
Yeah, we don't have to freak out.
Right.
We don't have to be overconfident either. We can have a plan. Yep. I love that. Do you have a personal plan of what you would do if you're stuck in the house for 3 weeks?
I mean, I feel like it would be the best time of my life.
I mean, is this wrong to say? I would really look forward to it.
I would look forward
I already got my Netflix queue lined up.
Every minute of it. The books I could read.
Oh, right.
I mean, my to be read show.
Yeah,
I might could take out 2 of them.
Look at you using some Goodreads lingo. Have you been on Goodreads?
I mean, not in real life.
Okay.
But other people say it. I like it. Yeah. Because I've had a bookshelf of that for years.
Come on. I mean, we've been promising, threatening each other with Anna Karenina for decades. So.
Absolutely. And the finishing of Hamilton. I'm going to insert that in there.
Yeah, you do that. I'm good.
You sure? You sure you never
No, thank you. It's a musical now. You don't have to read the book.
I still feel compelled, even when the stuff actually comes out.
Well, and they actually, girl, if you got the time,
they're gonna make it into a movie, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna rethink this.
Okay.
It might be on your desk soon.
Okay. Oh. Okay.
Okay. So each week, friends, we select a theme to discuss inspired by the book that we're reading, and we're continuing from last week's theme, which was why we left the South. So the part 2 version of this, I had an opportunity. Well, I decided I would reach out to my father's side of the family.
Because you and I have never left the South.
Right. Never left
in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I kind of left the South, but it wasn't then.
You went back as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Or you went to the South as an adult and then came back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I had an opportunity to speak with my aunt. And I learned a little bit more, but not much. So because she doesn't really know. So what I learned is that my grandfather, who we call Granddaddy, he had like 7 brothers and sisters, I believe. And he was the youngest. And he was born and raised in Sylacauga, Alabama.
Them names.
Yeah, in July of 1923. And towards the end of his mother's life, she was living in Sylacauga. So that's why my aunt believes that's where he was born and raised.
Okay.
He quit school at 6th grade and he joined the Army.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Come again?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, wait, how old are you in the 6th grade? I don't know if you can make that relationship because like in 6th grade today, you'd be like 11 years old. But here's something that I found was interesting. During
you can do these W words, girl. I believe in you.
During WW2.
Your ancestors did not migrate from the South for you to be saying WW2.
I'm not. I can't do it. During World War II.
That's what I'm talking about. Applause.
Which was from 1939 to 45. The U.S. allowed men and women 18 years of age and older to enlist. However, they did allow 16 and 17-year-olds to enlist with parental consent.
Wow. Okay.
And then there are also,
babies.
those that lied about joining the military for whatever reason. And it's noted that there's a boy as young as 12 that served in the military. So
During the First World War?
Second.
Oh, okay.
So he actually served 4 years in the war. Okay. And he was at Fort McClellan in Alabama. And I think it's in Anniston, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know how that works.
He was
it
black?
My father?
No,
My grandfather?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were still talking about the boy.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah, no. So my granddaddy met Granny, that's my grandmother, and sometime in the mid to late 40s, and they met near Fort McClellan. So when he left the war, he came back and kind of was in this Fort McClellan. That's where he kind of stayed. And I understand that's where most of the black folks were that were in the war, were stationed there. And so they moved to Milwaukee in the mid 40s. And that's like to get good work, to find solid job work.
Yeah, for more economic opportunity.
Yeah, I guess there was an economic boom. And so people were making their way that way. And so when he moved there, he started working for Alice Chalmer. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was a big machining company, and he worked and retired there. He worked there for 30 years and retired from there. But during the time when he worked there, he also participated in the Korean War, which was from 50 to 53.
Right.
I think he retired from Alice Chalmer in about 1975. So he really had like his whole life ahead of him. After that, he would have been pretty young. His parents owned a grocery store when they were living in Alabama, and they were supposed to be pretty prominent in that area. I also learned a little bit about my granny. Her maiden name was Mattie Powell, and she was born in May of 1923. She actually dropped out of school in the eighth grade, and she died in 1976. But she was born in Newton, Georgia, on a reservation.
Oh, okay.
To where she lived until she was about the age.
She was Native American?
That's what I'm...
Unknown.
Yeah, left to believe.
Yeah.
She had 7 brothers and sisters, and before... Yeah, she had 7 brothers and sisters, and after they moved off the reservation, they moved to Anniston, Alabama. And when they moved as a family, my granny and granddaddy moved to Milwaukee. She ended up working for affluent Jewish families in Fox Point. And so
as housekeeper?
Yep.
Okay.
As a nanny.
Okay.
As a nanny. I asked my aunt, did they return to Alabama? And she said they actually returned often. Couple times a year. They would go at Easter and Christmas because that's when Alice Chalmers had 2-week shutdowns. Okay. And they may have even gone.
They have family there. They
3
probably
times.
Wanted to see.
Yeah, they had
the holidays.
Big family. And so when I think about that in comparison to the people in the book, a lot of them didn't go back.
Right.
They just left it behind. So I thought that was interesting. I feel like their situation, I don't know, I'm not going to say it wasn't a hardship, but it just seems like, I don't know how to say it, but it didn't seem like it was difficult for them. So that was interesting.
I think in general, when I think of that time, I imagine they all led hard lives compared to the lives we live now. I mean, being involved in 2 wars, coming out, making a family right away, working in a factory for over 35 years, they were made of tougher stuff.
By all means, can I assure you. So did you have an opportunity to learn anything else about your family's migration?
So you'll remember that in our last episode, I called my mom and she was like, I don't know, the South was great or whatever. I played all day. I was 6. So this week, I called my grandma and she gave me a little more information. She had a little more to say.
Okay. All right. Let's get into it.
Okay.
Hello?
Hey, Grandma.
Hey,
How you doing?
good, you? You know what? I come here and look at that number and says Chicago, I am something. I said, I don't know that number. And turn around and walk out.
Yep, it's me. So are you busy?
No, go ahead.
Well, I have this like podcast, which is like a radio show, but you hear it on the internet. And we're reading a book called The Warmth of Other Suns, and it's about when 6 million Black people left the South and moved to the northern states, mostly to get away from like Jim Crow. So I wanted to interview you about your life growing up in the South and what it was like for you personally, with your permission. And yeah, so if you don't mind me asking, what year were you born?
1939.
Ooh, you ancient. That's beautiful.
I am 81, the 17th of March.
Okay.
I will be.
Golden brown girl. Where were you born?
Oh, Lord.
Do you remember where you're from?
Dillon County.
But you remember what state? Was it in Mississippi?
Yeah.
Okay. And how was life like for you growing up in the South? How was your school, first of all? Was it like
Kindergarten, one room. We had one room.
yeah. And then did you guys go to high school at that time?
I didn't go to high school.
Okay.
My oldest sister went to high school.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 18.
What did your parents do for work before you got married when you were still living with them?
We were sharecroppers. We lived on a...
And did you work with them as a child?
Yeah.
You picked cotton with your parents?
Yes.
What was that
That
like?
was my first job. They started you off with a little flour sack.
Wow. And
Picking cotton.
how old were you?
About 2 or 3. They started you out early being a farmer. Child.
You weren't 2 or 3 years old. Maybe like 5, right? No.
About 2 or 3.
2 or 3
They
years
started you out
old,
early
Grandma.
with a flour sack. And you fill up that little sack, and then you give it to your mama or your daddy or whoever has it on your sack. Huh?
I don't believe you. 2 or 3 years old, you could barely walk.
In the South, you walk fast. You didn't play around. It's hot out there.
So you learn how to walk fast, and then you learn how to pick cotton. And then how long did you work with your parents? Like till you were 18?
Until I was married. I'm going to tell you, too. Mom raised us like we was in the Army, and she was the...
Yeah, colonel.
Yeah. All she knew how to do was go do this, go do this.
Right.
And you better do this. If you don't do it again, you got to go back and do it again. Oh, boy. Mom was something else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she knew the meaning of the word love.
Mm-hmm. So she was the first generation in her family out of slavery. Do you think that might have made her a little harder?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, she sure could think of herself more than she could anybody else.
Mm.
It was hard being under Mom. Sometimes I wish I had never been born.
What about your dad?
Daddy was easygoing because he used to tell her, and she wouldn't pay him no attention.
Okay. When you were growing up and you guys were sharecropping, you at least had enough to get by. You don't remember going hungry or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. We used to go to bed hungry because we didn't have nothing in the kitchen to cook. We used to eat some awful mess just to have something in our stomach. Some old cornbread and some gravy. When it got cold, you could cut it like it's cake.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? You didn't have no meat in it. You just have some grease and put some flour in a skillet and pour some water in it or some milk. Yeah, we weren't hungry. We used to just eat corn. Rochinaires, as long as I could eat rochinaires, and I was able to go get it, we eat rochinaires. But when it got hard, we'd eat the hard corn.
And so what did you do for fun as a single woman before you got married?
Whenever I could, I'd go fishing. And on the weekends, we would go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes Daddy would take us to different church to have singing.
Mm-hmm. And how did men and women, black or white, treat you once you came of age?
I mind my own business. I didn't go around saying yes and no, sir, because I didn't believe in it, so I wouldn't talk to them.
So you just would avoid white people?
No, I didn't. I didn't do that. I just wouldn't talk to them. But they did want you to say yes, ma'am, no, sir, and all that junk.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I didn't want to say it, I didn't talk to them.
Okay.
Daddy and Mama said it.
Yeah. Were you the youngest? Were you the youngest?
No.
How many kids? How many kids were in your house? 8. Okay.
The third. I was the third child.
Third. Okay. I remember a story about you causing trouble in school and just leaving. Is that true? Did that happen?
I told you, no, I didn't play.
You didn't play.
And I knew what I was going to do if you told me to do something because I didn't want to play a game.
So what happened? What happened at school that made you leave that one day?
Play chicken fly. Who wants to sit up in school and play chicken fly?
You didn't go to school for that.
I didn't do that. She said, go sit out in the hall. I told my sisters, but I said, I'm going home. I went home.
Was home far from school?
No.
Okay, so and how old were you, do you think?
13 or 14.
So that is too old to be at school playing games. So they wanted just to waste your time.
Yeah.
And so you left.
Yeah.
So you was a pistol is what you're trying to say. You didn't take any mess and you didn't
I didn't.
From anybody.
I tried to mind my own business.
Yeah.
And if you push me, I'll let you know you ain't pushing me.
Right.
I didn't care who you were. I'm like this. If I don't push you, don't push me.
Right. So what made you want to get married?
I love I told Mom, I said, I'm going to marry him. He was coming up there to see me.
So he was cute.
And yeah, I thought he was handsome.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to marry him. When he asked me, I said, yes.
And how old was Grandpa when you got married?
Oh, it was 10 years between me and him.
Okay, so when you were 18, my grandfather was 28, and he was coming to see about you, and you thought he was cute.
Yeah, he was handsome.
How was your wedding?
Oh, I didn't have no wedding. We went up there to Ashland to the courthouse and got married.
And then what was your home like? Where did you go after the courthouse?
I went to his grandmother's house.
Okay. Oh, yeah, because Mama was telling me Grandma was messy. Great-grandma.
Oh, yeah, she was very messy. But guess what? She treated me good.
Yeah.
She treated me like I was her child.
Wow. And what made you leave her house?
Because I always believe if a person getting married, they should have their own house.
Yeah.
So we moved it out into our own shack.
What was your first house like?
A shack. The front room was good.
Yeah.
But and the kitchen was okay, but the room from there, it was 2 more rooms. It never was finished.
Okay, so it was 4 rooms and only 2 were finished. Did it?
Mm-hmm.
And then you had your little daughter. Well, having kids was hard back then, right? Because you're doing a lot of physical work, and a lot of women lost their babies before they were born.
Yeah, I lost 4 sons there.
Yeah.
I'm the mother of 12 children.
Right. Mm-hmm. But you have 8 that made it.
Mm-hmm. If all of my boys had a living, I'd had 9 sons and 3 daughters.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So when you had my mom, what made you want to move to the north?
You know, I was just used to the South. But Mom gave me enough money. My mom told me they was leaving there.
Yeah.
And she gave me enough money to get me a ticket to Illinois.
So your mom your mom was living in Evanston already?
No, she was telling me that she was going to come to, they was leaving the South.
Okay. Did she ever leave?
And so she gave me the money. I came to Illinois, and then shortly after they came.
Okay, they did come. So you were all in Evanston.
Uh-huh.
What made you move to Milwaukee?
Because our family was getting larger.
Okay.
And we needed our own home. we couldn't afford those homes in Illinois.
Okay.
It was too high. So we come to Milwaukee. We could find us a home.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do for work when you moved north?
Oh, I worked in housekeeping.
What did he do?
He started out as a carpenter, and then in Illinois, he worked as a book bounder.
You know, I remember him playing the piano. He never had piano lessons. How did he learn how to play those instruments?
He played by sound.
He did, yeah.
And he could play anything.
Yeah.
Harp, anything he could get his hands on, he could play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember him being really naturally gifted that way. Yeah, all Mama remembered was playing and her pet pig and her pet dog.
Yeah, she was little. And she'd go to fishing with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a paradise to her. She was just playing all day long while y'all was working.
Yeah, she didn't do no work. She don't know about picking no cotton.
No. So I'm thankful that you shared this with me. We'll put it on the show, and I'll come over and show you how to listen to it.
Okay.
All right. Well, I love you, Grandma, and I'll talk to you later.
I love you too, but take care of yourself and be careful.
Okay, I will.
Okay, now you be careful now.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Okay, talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. So did she talk about it all? The difficulties of dealing with the, what do you call them? The handler?
The planter?
The planter.
Yeah, she mentioned that her family kind of were in their cocoon. They didn't have to interact with their planter very often, from what she remembers. So they didn't have a big problem with him specifically.
Okay.
But the work paid you next to nothing. And even while in the South, my grandpa abandoned sharecropping for, I think, factory work before they even moved north.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
so
the
they
pay
could
was
still get the factory jobs there.
He did, yeah, for a time. I don't know if the pay was that much better then for him, but it was, it was something more than what they were getting with sharecropping. Yeah.
Pretty cool. I really love hearing these stories. Why don't we take a quick break before we jump into the part 2?
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Ready for part 2?
Yes.
All right, let's get started with this deep dive into Warmth of Other Suns.
Okay, and if you readers listening are looking for some context about the author, please refer to part 1, where we give you some background on Isabel Wilkerson. She's a pretty interesting lady.
Yeah.
Pretty and interesting. And then we also set up the synopsis for you. And there's a little American history lesson there, too, if you're interested in that.
Which is great and valuable information.
But this is part 2 of The Warmth of Other Suns, our final part by the Lit Society podcast. Ida Mae Gladney, George Swanson Starling, Dr. Bob Pershing Foster. You'll remember that these are the 3 people whose lives we were following. Right. We started with Ida last week. This week we're gonna start with Pershing. We're going to start with, I'm going to call him Dr. Foster this episode. He is the Pershing from last episode. Dr. Foster, Los Angeles, April 1953. In our last reading, he was sitting with his family in Louisiana and telling them, I don't know how y'all can stay in this town with Jim Crow on your neck. I'm leaving.
Right.
And he made a drive solo without his wife and children to California to set it up for them before bringing them into the West.
Right.
That drive, he got to the point of deliriousness with his exhaustion, because having entered the North and believing himself to be free here, no hotel would admit him. One hotel owner, he explained the situation to the hotel owner's wife, telling her, listen, I'm driving all the way from here. If I don't sleep soon, I'm at this point a risk to others. I am delirious.
Yeah.
I just need to lay down, and I can't pull over on the side of the road because I'll get arrested. And she looked at him, went and talked to her husband. Her husband came out and said, listen, we're from the North. We don't believe in segregation. However, the hotels around us will report us or harass us if we take in a colored man. We're sorry. There's nothing we can do for you.
That is a heartbreaking story.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
But eventually, Pershing, Dr. Foster, did make his way to Los Angeles. A little note, 2 blacks were among the 40 or so men who founded LA. The caste system in California was arbitrary and senseless. So there's no Jim Crow, but, you know, white people still don't like black people.
Right.
So some hotels may not give you a room. Some restaurants might let you just sit there and never serve you.
Right.
And you never really knew where you stood. So it's this awkward position where, at least in the South, you knew it was Jim Crow. But you get to the North and Jim Crow is illegal, but people still want to have their own like caste system. So you never know what you're supposed to do in any given environment. Still, Dr. Foster loved the too muchness of it all.
Yeah.
Now, remember, he originally didn't want to be a doctor. He wanted to go to Hollywood and like be a star.
He wanted to be a star.
He pictured himself in the Rat Pack, you know? But things were expected of him. And he actually did love being a doctor now that he was one.
Oh, yeah. Get into his story.
But when he got into this big showing off environment, he was right at home.
Do you hear me? This man was at home.
The lawns were overly manicured.
Right.
The lights were bright. He looked for an old professor from Morehouse, Dr. Beck. I really love Dr. Beck.
Yeah.
Beck's father had died of tuberculosis and no white doctor would see him. So Dr. Beck became the doctor that he was to ensure that no colored man was going to die on his watch if he could help it. White people called him uppity. And I mean, they even beat him one day. There was a story about how he suffered physical abuse while practicing as a doctor. When he moved to California, the palm tree in front of his mansion was set on fire. He went to court and sued the neighborhood. So the neighborhoods would have covenants in the North where they all agreed never to let in a black person. Right. If a white person sold their home to a black person, the black person would then face the assault from his neighbors. And it was common actually for white people to break this covenant because you could get more money selling to a black person who can't find a home anywhere else. Right. So if you come across a, upper class black person who has the money, why would you not sell to them? You gonna leave the neighborhood anyway.
Exactly. You don't care. Get that money.
Make this neighborhood black because I'm going to the other side of town. Money, please, bye. So that's what would happen. Dr. Beck bought this mansion from a white family. His palm tree was set on fire and he sued the neighborhood for their covenant, about their covenant, and he won. Yep. The white families around him were out in a matter of months. Yep. They sold their homes, they packed their families into their cars and left. Dr. Beck meant well and promised he referred patients to Dr. Foster when Dr. Foster arrived. We should also say that Pershing a country name. And so now he goes by Dr. Bob Foster.
He dropped that. He was like, I'm leaving that.
I'm leaving that with Jim Crow. I'm no longer Pershing. I'm Bob.
I'm putting it behind me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even though Dr. Beck would promise to refer clients to Dr. Foster, Bob knew that he needed his own practice. And in the back of his mind, he's thinking, well, I believe Oakland to be the promised land for me, or the land where I should make my home and plant my roots. So he went to Oakland. And when he got there, the black neighborhood looked too much like the land he was running from.
He was not trying to hear that. See?
It looked just like the South. And he returned to LA and began living for the first time in his life. 1953, Los Angeles. He had $1.50 in his pocket. It had to be enough to buy equality. He lived in the guest room of Dr. Beck's home, who treated him like a son.
Yeah, he was kind to him.
Yeah, him and his wife, who had like this Doris Day. What's the lady name?
It was Doris Day.
Yeah, basically she was fine. Yeah, she didn't know how to cook, clean, or do nothing because she was fine. She never had to.
Right, she
was a beautiful black woman from an upper class family who married a very rich man. And she didn't know how to work, but she knew the social life, and she could throw a party and pick your colors.
Did they say Lena Hornish?
There we go. She had a Lena Hornish beauty.
Yes.
Yeah. So she was gorgeous. Dr. Bob Foster began to live off the patients that Dr. Beck would throw his way. It was outside of Jim Crow South, and Dr. Foster had first experienced discrimination by his own kind. Let me explain. With more options available in the North, a lot of Northern Black people wanted the best, and to them that seemed to be the whitest. Yeah. To make a life, Dr. Bob Foster was taking whatever Dr. Beck could give him, but he was also making house calls for the nation, one of the nation's only Black health insurance companies. He would make a house call and collect samples. This is not something a surgeon would reduce himself to, but it's what he had to do to make money. He went to one home and
as a Black doctor.
Yeah, he went, and he was visiting Black families. So he went to one home, and the husband allowed him to examine him and say, "Come on, baby, it's time for your examination." And the woman said, "I told you I'm not going to let no nigga doctor examine me." Dr. Bob Foster was flabbergasted. This type of alarming discrimination hurt many Black businesses in the North.
So interesting, because these are things we kind of see today.
A little bit like crab in the barrel syndrome. Like, I want what's the absolute best because now I have the ability to get it, and the best has always been white. Yeah. So I want to put myself, I don't want to go back to wherever I came from. I want to be better than that, and better is white.
Yep.
Even in his old classmates from back home who had moved to California, he wasn't seen as the doctor. So there was a large population of people from Monroe, Louisiana, where he was from, and they saw him as the Foster boy.
Yeah.
I ain't going to go there and be putting my legs in stirrups for the Foster boy. Also, they held long grudges.
Yeah.
Go ahead. These people was petty. With tea and coffee.
Absolutely.
Petty cakes.
They were all of the petties. I mean, because he was like, anything that they remembered, because they had some long memories, they would
remember that his parents were in education.
Yes.
So if his dad ever punished them or his mom gave them detention, they wouldn't go visit him in their adult lives for medical care. They wouldn't do it. If they had, he would have the biggest practice in the world. That's how many people from Monroe had made the trip to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So
amazing.
The thing I love about Dr. Bob Pershing Foster is his resilience. Once he saw a door close, he'd drill a hole in the wall to make another door. So
he was determined.
Yeah. He thought, I'm going to just really be charismatic and get the clients of other people, get clients from elsewhere, like from Texas and everywhere else, basically, but Monroe, Louisiana. Yeah. Because he was a great doctor.
I'm going to stand out. I'm going to dress and stand out and have this personality.
And then people from Monroe will regret that they ever, he did have a pride thing.
Yeah,
so,
he did.
You know, so they would regret they ever rejected him. While he's struggling in Los Angeles, his father-in-law is
booming. I mean,
experiencing some of the biggest successes of his life. His father-in-law is his biggest rival. Remember, he's the head of the University of Atlanta, the graduate school for Morehouse and Spelman. This is the man who's seen as the head of his family because Dr. Foster's children barely know him. They've only basically lived with their grandfather, Dr. Clement. Was he a doctor? It don't matter.
I don't know.
He was very successful.
He wasn't a doctor.
He wasn't. Okay. He won a seat in public office, a landmark victory that earned him a profile in the New York Times. And the irony shook Pershing.
Yeah.
This man had remained in the South, staying in Atlanta, had ridiculed Dr. Foster for wanting to leave. And now Pershing was like taking scraps, taking urine samples. He's a surgeon, going to people's homes and experiencing racism from his own people.
An experienced surgeon.
Yeah.
Who had helped in the war.
Yep.
And here he's come back home and is collecting urine.
Oh, that's insane. A little
for $7.
Oh yeah, which was like
he got $2 extra if he brought the urine cup back. Is that what it was? I mean, wow.
Yeah. Yep. But he didn't let this opportunity go to waste. He made sure that every client or every patient that he visited for this Black health insurance firm was converted into his patient. Because again, he was an excellent doctor and he had this down home bedside manner.
Yeah.
And then he dressed well and he made sure he looked the part. He looked like a movie star. He was a doctor and he acted like he cared about you because he really did.
Yeah. I think Los Angeles was perfect for him.
I know. So a little bit about migrants and education. Contrary to nearly every assumption, the migrating Black person, the population of Black people who migrated were more educated than many of the resident white population around them, and definitely the Blacks who were born in the North. It took a distinguishing steadfastness and self-discipline to make the trek and carve out a life from nearly nothing.
Right.
And because of that, like resilience, they had a little something extra, if anthropologists are to be believed. But there is a stereotype that they brought down the classes, especially within Black people of the North. That actually factually is not true. Back to Pershing, Los Angeles, 1953. People from back home had long memories. And like we said, them people from Monroe would visit him for his medical services. He'd suggest surgery and they go, "What you trying to do? Buy a new fur coat for Alice?"
Yes.
These comments stung him. So he decided to find success without the people from back home. He also finally sent for his family who hadn't been with him. They hadn't been together since Austria. Okay. They had 3 girls now. And they never lived as a family. A woman promised to rent them a place only to renege when she saw his color. He found an apartment near Dr. Beck, a far cry from the Atlanta mansion his family was coming from, but it was theirs. Yeah. Alice and Pershing didn't know each other. Nowhere was this more evident than at the dinner table. She created these like new Black dishes, like Betty Crocker recipes, casseroles. Right. And he was like, "Where's the hog maws? Where are the chitlins? Where are the greens? All this stuff is stupid." His family was paying the price for separation. She would say, "The children don't like that." And he'd say, "A child likes what his mom cooks him, and you gonna cook what I like."
Yeah, absolutely.
Alice wouldn't enter society. They had like a social circle that you had to pay membership to be in, which, still exists today.
Oh, yeah.
And this
Jack and Jill, I think, is one of those.
Yeah. And so this like Southern royal, since she was coming from basically Black Southern royalty, her mother did buy her admission into this social circle, but she wouldn't enter society until they had a proper house. She knew the importance of starting on the right foot to progress them, Instead of buying a house, though, Dr. Foster bought a Cadillac. Okay, they needed a house. He bought a shiny car because that was him. That was him. 1955, he's finally allowed admittance at a local hospital. So that's the thing with the doctor. If your patient needs surgery, you need admittance rights at the hospital to be able to work on your patient.
Yeah.
The white doctors there would discuss on Monday morning all the fun they'd been having in Vegas. Now, you may remember in the last episode, I told you Dr. Foster likes to gamble, but he doesn't have a problem. I'm so sorry. He does. He has a bit of an issue with the gambling. And when the white doctors would talk on Monday morning about all the fun they had in Vegas, it was a thorn in his side because he really wanted to go to Vegas, but Black people weren't really allowed in Vegas.
Right.
This angered him. He heard, however, that there was a Black man who had an inn and could get you in. And so he called him up. That man made a reservation for Pershing and all his friends and their wives, a total of 13 people at the Riviera Hotel. This was huge. Just thinking about it made Pershing, who went by Bob now, again, feel like a member of the Rat Pack. That was like the scene he wanted to be in. That was made for him.
That was big deal.
They shopped and prepared for weeks, buying the right clothes, the right hair pomade, no doubt. The wives had 3 different outfits to wear each day. Ooh. They pulled up to the hotel with cases and cases and crates and trunks. Enough clothes to clothe the entire state of California.
Get them.
But when they arrived, the Riv wouldn't let them in their room. They were humiliated, standing in the middle of this beautiful lobby in front of everyone with a boatload of luggage, stranded. A surgeon and all his surgeon friends. This is stupid. And dressed to the nine. Pershing called the black man who helped them get the reservation, and that man helped them get another reservation at the Sands Hotel. The Sands Hotel didn't have enough room for them, but told them to stay somewhere else for one night, and the Sands Hotel would personally come get them and bring them back to the hotel. It kept its word. For that reason, Dr. Foster says he has a soft spot in his heart for the Sands Hotel for treating them with respect, for keeping their word.
Dignity.
He and his friends had the time of their lives, and Dr. Foster finally had stories to share with the other doctors back home on Monday morning.
And a place to go and gamble that money away.
Still in the 1950s, his strategy of going after everyone but the Monroe people was working. Even the hospitality staff at the hospital began visiting him. He didn't let anyone go by without saying, "How you doing? You know, I saw you walking a little differently today. Tell me about it." And that was one of the things, too, like when he would see you in his office, he would light a cigarette. Am I remembering this right?
Yep.
Put up his feet and go, "So tell me about it."
Yeah. And so people were waiting hours to see him.
To kick it with a great surgeon who was going to give you great service.
Yeah, because he had a family practice.
But he was also a therapist. And they would tell him all their stuff. "I think my wife's seeing so-and-so." Seriously.
Yes, everything.
And bringing their kids, like, "She ain't telling me what she doing. I think she pregnant. Make her tell you." And he was like a member of their family.
Yeah. They really valued him. He had this wonderful bedside manner.
Yes. Which really made me miss that. We don't have that now.
No.
So anyway, he had a way about him where he could talk to anyone about anything. And on top of that, he was an amazing doctor. He showed real concern staying by people's bed until there was a sign of them getting better. He was a sharp dresser, charismatic. People loved to be around him. And this made his clientele grow even more. Through word of mouth, he got one patient that even you, reader, may know. Ooh. Last name Charles, first name Ray.
Hey, Ray.
So Ray Charles became one of his most devoted patients and friend. He was finally in a position to buy a home, which he did, a relief to his in-laws who were like, "What is taking so long?" His wife then entered the social circles of Los Angeles, and a third child was born. They named her Joy, which is a little sign of how they felt this moment in their lives.
Right.
Still in the 1950s, a woman calls hysterically in the middle of the night saying that her husband had cut his hand. It was Ray Charles, and he had a tour to go on 1 week later. He was likely high. Remember, Ray had a heroin addiction and exhausted from writing for hours on end. He had smashed his hand on a glass table, severing an artery and a tendon. Pershing had to perform emergency surgery. Dr. Foster had to perform emergency surgery, and he saved the hand of this famous piano player. That was an invaluable act as far as Ray Charles was concerned. He also followed Ray on tour, sitting in the front row. For the hand, he had to make sure it didn't get affected. And I believed him.
Why wouldn't we?
But he liked being there,
Right. But he was committed to his patients.
Yes,
and
he was.
Wanted to make sure, because he knew that Ray Charles was going to do what he wanted to do. And he wanted to make sure that when he did what he wanted to do, that his hand was recovering properly.
He liked touching on women and, shaking gentlemen's hands and, But one thing about Ray is he played that tour with one hand.
Yeah.
That man was exceptional. At one of their stops, a little blind boy hops on stage. The boy idolized Ray Charles, of course. And the little boy plays a few songs on his harmonica.
Wonder who that is.
Stevie Wonder. What a time to be alive. Ray Charles wrote extensively of this time in his book, his autobiography, making sure to clear any speculation that Dr. Foster was acquiring drugs for the artist.
Clear my name.
He praised the doctor, saying that it was Dr. Foster who saved his hand and his career. Ray Charles ended up having 12 children. Only 3 by his wife, who later divorced him. However, that third, they named him Bob after Dr. Foster. 1962, Ray Charles wrote a little ditty. He asked Dr. Foster, "I'm writing this song and I want to put you in it." And Foster was like, "Okay." So, have you heard that song?
Dr. Foster, and when the girl answered the phone, I got a funny feeling the way she said Dr. Foster had gone. She said he left with a lady patient about 24 hours ago. I added 2 and 2, and here's what I got. I'll never see that girl no more. Well, I ain't seen her, I have my baby since that day, yeah. But I ain't seen her, I have my baby since she went away. If Dr. Foster has got her, then I know I'm through, because he's got medicine and money too. I ain't seen her, my hair, my baby since that day. Oh, no.
The song is called Hide Nor Hair. After that song came out, Dr. Foster, who was already very successful, his business boomed. More patients than he could handle filled his office. Patients would wait all day. They would make an appointment, go out, run errands, come back, and still have to sit and wait. This is when Dr. Foster is at the height of his life. But it seems like when everything is going good, something bad has to happen. His brother, Madison, was back home, still being a backwoods surgeon. But he himself needed surgery on his gallbladder. Dr. Foster did not trust the doctors back in the South, and he convinced Madison to drive to California or fly to California and get surgery at his hospital, at Dr. Foster's hospital. His brother dies after the gallbladder surgery in California. Dr. Foster never got over it, and his sister-in-law held a grudge. The people in Monroe blamed Dr. Foster and the North.
That was tough.
For thinking you all that, and look what happened.
Yeah.
So that stays with him for the rest of his life. 1967, his great rival, his father-in-law, is growing in power while Dr. Foster falls deeper into his gambling addiction. His wife is the perfect picture of a doctor's wife. He dresses her out of pride for himself. He'll go into the store, buy her 3-4 dresses and make her model them for him. Sitting down. Now walk toward me. Now turn.
I mean, honey.
Yeah.
He made sure that dress did her right.
Right.
Who wouldn't want nobody like that?
He said the dress would come alive when she put it on.
I mean, who wouldn't want nobody that just know you that way and just like, yes, honey, that works for you. I mean, what?
Right. Right. So his daughters also were in the middle of that social scene. They were attending cotillions. And while they're having all this success, his father-in-law dies of a heart attack before a world tour he planned with his wife, Alice's mom.
Right,
I think her name was Pearl.
Down, right?
Or I think he was still going to be the head of the school, actually.
This trip. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But once he dies, they're forced out of that president's mansion in Atlanta.
Yes.
And Alice's mom has to come live with them in Los Angeles. The thing is, that mansion in Atlanta had been Alice's mom's home for her adult life. And now she is uprooted and stuck in Los Angeles with them. Unfortunately, soon Alice dies of cancer, and her mother, Pearl, hates Pershing's guts. The feeling was mutual.
Rough.
Yeah. And Pearl soon returns to the South. Dr. Foster is left alone for the first time in his life and desperately missing his wife. And he missed her companionship. He turned deeper into his gambling addiction, and it took him to Vegas for overnight shifts in large hotels that would comp his room and food, knowing that they would get tenfold in return. He'd win some, he'd lose some. He would lose other people's annual salaries in one night. He could also win that much. Back home, he crashed his Cadillac, not because he was drunk, but because he had always been a bad driver. This was not a good moment in Dr. Foster's life. He closed his private practice in favor of simplicity and began working as a staff doctor at a VA hospital. One day, a white female patient complained about one of his examinations. He had fled Jim Crow South and had managed never to cross a white woman, even getting a kiss from one at a dinner party. Now, working a job he didn't even need, he would face what he had escaped. The hospital moved him to an undesirable corner of the building, and his every move was scrutinized. His health began to fail him, and he was forced to retire. It should be noted there was no misconduct on his record, according to the hospital.
Right.
An old patient reminisces about his bedside manner years before he retired, and this is what she says. Another migrant named Melissa Briley did not fully grasp it until she had to go into surgery herself. She was in her mid-40s at the time, a social worker in Los Angeles who had gone to Spelman with Alice. She was anxious about going into the hospital. Robert did the surgery and the surgery went well, but later that night, her blood pressure shot out of control. She was on the verge of having a stroke, which could have killed her or left her paralyzed. The hospital tried to get her blood pressure down, but had no success. At midnight, the hospital called Robert to report the turn of events. He rushed over right away. He tried to lower her blood pressure, but he couldn't get it down either. The next morning, Briley awoke to see Robert in a chair by her bed. She was stunned to see him there. It was early winter, the quiet time of the morning, so early that the hospital hadn't brought the breakfast tray yet. He was in his street clothes and uncharacteristically wrinkled. He hadn't shaved, had bags under his eyes. "What are you doing here this early?" she asked him. He told her she had gone through a crisis the night before and that neither he nor the hospital could get her blood pressure down. "What did you do?" she asked. "Well, I got to the point I couldn't do nothing but pray," he said. He had stayed by her hospital bed all night. He had sat upright in a chair in his street clothes. Any patient he lost, he took it personally and especially hard. He took it as a sign of his own failure. So he had fought back sleep watching over this patient and praying for her to live. By morning, her blood pressure had returned to a safe range. He made sure her vital signs were stable, gave instructions to the nurse to call him immediately should there be any change. Then he left to see about the rest of his patients. He had stayed through the night, she said 40 years later, still almost in disbelief. "I woke up and there he was. That I'll never forget as long as I live." At the end of his life, he continued to see patients at his home, and he'd take their calls any time of night. If medicine was his wife, then gambling, though, was his mistress. He was addicted to it. One heart attack after another forced him home, and he slipped into despair. He suffered a massive stroke in the summer of 1997, fell into a coma, and died August 6th. In the end, he was remembered as being a man who gave more than he got as a doctor. There were children named after him and families that would do anything for him, but his own family, his 3 girls, were distant from him. They had never known him, like Melissa Briley, the patient who was reminiscing, or Ray Charles, or any of the other people who used to wait all day in his office to see him.
Yeah, they loved him. Madison was the self-described country cousin and one of Robert's biggest champions. A living reminder of the South that Robert had put behind him. Madison thought about all the things Robert had been through in the South and out West, the rejections despite the triumphs and never feeling good enough. These things made him an exacting, infuriating, insecure perfectionist who left a mark on everyone he met. The people around him knew to smooth their tie, check their hem, reach a little higher, do a little more, because Robert Foster demanded it of them. He made everybody crazy and better for the sky-high expectations he had of them for even the smallest things. If you bought him a melon, Madison said, you couldn't just buy a melon. You had to stop and think about that melon. That's how he was with everything. Madison thought back to how Robert had tried to get all of Monroe to come to Los Angeles. Bob would say, "You want some Monroe? Plenty of Monroe out here. You can have Monroe in California." Then Madison remembered the trips he had made to Los Angeles, his feeling tentative and unsure, being from small town Louisiana as he was, but exhilarated to be out in California with his uncle. "Come on, Chief," Bob would say. "Let's go to Beverly Hills and have breakfast on the veranda. Put your chain out. Put that gold chain out. You ain't on no college campus now. Put your chain out. That's why I gave you that chain." This was Robert's promised land. He walked around as if he had been born to it. He didn't have a care in the world, Madison remembered. All your problems were gone. Nothing could happen to you. You were with Uncle Bob. He lightened the room. He created another world for you. The man had a certain magic to him.
Part 2. George Swanton Starling, New York, 1945, April 15th. He didn't consider himself as part of a movement. He only saw his out from a life of being less than a man, constantly in fear of death. And that's why George moved to the North. He tried to walk like he had seen it all, like everyone else did in Harlem. In a way, in a life or death sort of way, he had seen it all. George found a job right away working for the railroad. That is a difficult word. That was because this is because he moved right in the heart of World War II. This occupation exposed him to women and to alcohol and did little to help his already troubled marriage. He was a coach attendant, being paid less than his white counterparts, but still making much more than he would have as a fruit picker back home. Race relations in the city were at their worst during the draft riots of 1863. During this time, the descendants of freed slaves in the 1820s, about 10,000 people, were being lynched and beat and harassed, mostly by Irish immigrants. They set fire to an orphanage and dragged a black coachman out of his home, hanged him, and then dragged his body through the streets by his genitals. Disgusting. Those Irish immigrants resented the fact that they had to fight in a war that would only work to free competition for the jobs they were holding, as many of those slaves would become free looking for work in the North. This violence moved Black people farther and farther north of Manhattan, eventually to Harlem. By 1930, some 160,000 Black people were living in Harlem. And some, what are those buildings called? Tenements. There were so many people that they had to sleep in shifts. Yeah. As soon as a man woke up, someone was ready to take his spot in his bed. Authorities in the Harlem area tried measures similar to Jim Crow in order to stifle the growth of Black residents. But in the end, that didn't work. Not because white people were more tolerant, but because they were more pragmatic. And like we said, you could get more money from a white renter or even a Black renter or a Black buyer because they had fewer options. They knew that they could extract a higher amount. And so they wanted the money. Mm-hmm. A choice was before them. Do they save the neighborhood from Blacks, insisting to rent and sell only to whites who were fleeing the area in droves anyway? Or would they break down and sell and rent to Black people? They did the latter. The New North. In Harlem, 7th Avenue was like the Champs-Élysées. Men and women marched through the streets on Sunday afternoons in the best clothing they could get their hands on. Mm-hmm. Elks would have their caps and batons, fox stoles, ostrich feathers, big hats. They were the bell hands and like laundry ladies back home. And in the North, they could dress the way they saw themselves. Yeah. Black luminaries lived in close proximity. Langston Hughes, Thurgood Marshall, W.E.B. Du Bois for a period, Paul Robinson, Duke Ellington, and even Richard Wright, who maybe felt he outgrew Chicago, were all living in the same area. It's crazy. George was nowhere near this like Sugar Hill gang, but he saved up and found a brownstone in Harlem to buy. He put down a payment and sent for his wife, Inez, who was still in the South. He spent time at the Savoy Ballroom. It had a marble staircase. Ella Fitzgerald was the house vocalist. Greta Garbo would be there, and plenty of people from the South were there to run into. It was like a family reunion every weekend at this club. Unlike many ballrooms, such as the Cotton Club, the Savoy always had a no discrimination policy, and the clientele was 85% Black. Although sometimes it was even, but he loved being here. He loved really sinking into New York life. Yeah, he loved that life. So George finally sent for Inez and had plans for her to open a beauty shop because remember she went to beauty school. Right. Mm-hmm. She became a nurse to spite him. She hates him. I mean, their relationship, though. New city, but their marriage had the same old problems. Mm-hmm. After 8 years of marriage, Inez and George had a son. George was ecstatic. They named him Gerard. Yeah, I think so. Something like that. Yeah. But he needed to return. George needed to return to the railroad to take care of this growing family. Yeah. On the railroad, he acted as a guide for Southerners entering the quote unquote promised land. They didn't tip him, but they'd pay him in maybe the fried chicken that they brought aboard. He was already paid a low amount that was supposed to be supplemented with tips. So it was hard getting by. One man boarded with a trunk so heavy that George fell when he tried to lift it. The man said it was full of clothes, but on the turbulent train ride, the locks flung open and sweet potatoes flew everywhere. The man goes, hey, you got a flashlight? And George goes, I ain't got a flashlight that'll stay bright enough for you to pick up your clothes. I need my flashlight. Sorry, man.
He brought a trunk full of potatoes.
The other 51 passengers were laughing and collecting themselves, collecting for themselves some delicious potatoes.
Woo! Can you imagine?
Nope. So George was in New York for 6 years before the South caught up with him. An old acquaintance from his substitute teaching days had run into trouble. His name was Harry T. Moore. Oh, yeah. He was the NAACP's chief organizer in Florida, a risky volunteer position. He'd used that position to investigate lynchings and unequal pay. One case in particular spurred him to action. A young black boy sent a young white girl a Christmas card. The girl showed it to her father, who gathered a posse, went and found the boy, and made that boy's father watch while they tortured and drowned him. Moore began acting even more fervently. Moore had only met George once, and they shared that anger at the injustice faced by especially colored children at that time. July 16, 1949, Groveland, Florida, a 17-year-old white woman accused 4 black men of raping her and attacking her husband. One of the men was already in police custody during the alleged incident, but it didn't matter. He was still considered a suspect. Authorities killed one suspect before he was even taken to jail. Tensions were so high that 350 residents of Groveland, Florida had to be taken to Orlando. The suspects were beat with rubber hoses. Black residents had to be taken to Orlando. The suspects were beat with rubber hoses in police custody. The man chosen as the lawyer said he had no desire to handle the case. 2 men were sentenced to death. And the one man that was already in police custody, he was given life in prison. So they had mercy on him, quote unquote.
Mercy.
Right. Moore put pressure on the courts by sending letters to the governor, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney General. A second trial was granted. The sheriff of Groveland, Sheriff McCall, decided to move the men for no explainable reason, handcuffed together to another prison. The sheriff loaded them into his personal car. He said that during the process, they attacked him and he was forced to shoot them dead. They were killed by the sheriff, or seemingly, while still handcuffed together. Criticism poured in from all over the country. Anger only increased when it was found out that one of the men lived, pretending to be dead just so the sheriff would stop shooting at him. Moore called for an investigation and removal of the sheriff. In the background, the NAACP isn't looking too kindly on Moore. They're like sick of him for other reasons. And he was voted out. The sheriff and the lawmakers around him, the white people, had no idea this was happening. But because of it, Moore lost the backing of the NAACP. One night, a bomb went off under the bed where Moore and his wife slept. They both died. It was discovered that the Klan was behind the attack. However, they all said they were at a barbecue together the night that it happened.
Of course, no one
was ever charged.
Accountable.
1950, still with George Swanson Starling. In 1954, him and his wife Inez had a girl. I don't know how these people that hate each other keep having kids.
Jay's married.
Also, a relative in the South dies, unfortunately, and her daughter comes to live with him. That daughter,
that's right.
Yes. And he treats that girl, her name's Pat, like a daughter.
Yeah.
And she seems really sweet, actually. Pat comes to live with them and tells Inez that Jared, her son, does drugs when Inez is at work.
Wait, he was 12.
He was 12 doing, I believe, heroin.
Yeah.
Inez, for her, Jared is her entire world, and she is disgusted that anyone would ever say something bad about him. And Inez is miserable. She's
But she has her own level of issues.
Yeah, exactly. So Inez, George's wife, forces Pat, the girl who, just lost her whole family, forces her out of the house, not caring where she had to go. She began living with a stranger. Fortunately, it was a church woman who let her live with her until she got on her feet. All through her life, she stayed like a daughter to George.
Right.
And Jared grew up an addict. George begins collecting money for bombed southern cities as the civil rights movement takes off. He starts discreetly telling black passengers that they legally no longer have to move to the Jim Crow car. They sent their 13-year-old daughter to the South, George and Inez, to learn her roots, as many black families do. And what happened next is something they could not have expected. She came back pregnant. 13. This was the most difficult period for the family.
I mean, whoa. Sorry that was delayed, but I mean,
no.
whoa.
And George thinks of the girl in school that said she was pregnant with his baby once. Yeah. He never told anyone this. The baby was stillborn and he was relieved. He thought of him and Inez before they were married.
Yeah.
They wasn't that pure. And he thought all of this was something like karma.
Yeah.
So when his daughter got pregnant, so did his mistress. George is like, he's...
Insert mistress here. George was living the life in New York.
So Inez, her 13-year-old daughter, and her husband's mistress are pregnant. These pregnancies crush Inez's spirit. Mm-hmm. The son is born from the mistress, and his name is Kenny. Kenny only ever knew his father, George, from afar. When George tried to get back at his father by marrying Inez all those years ago, it seems he was only getting back at himself. Inez eventually dies of cancer. From the moment her mother died giving birth to her, Inez was a woman with no champion, no consoler. She'd poured herself into Jared, her son, and he was an addict with everything that came with it. So she died miserably.
Yeah.
George's kids returned to Florida, which felt like a slap in the face to him when they became adults. His daughter moved to Eustis, where he came from, of all places.
How? Why?
Of course, it was a totally different environment at this time, but he just couldn't see how he had sacrificed so much to give them all the opportunities of the North. They grew up and went to the South.
And he didn't feel like they valued. Well, I think you said that because they didn't even do anything with school or anything.
Right. And school was so important to him.
Yeah.
His son moved to Miami, where he fell deeper into drug activity, becoming a big time dealer with cars and wads of cash. They were both George's biggest disappointments, having never found their way. Victims of the migrants' forced devotion to work instead of home life, where they could have provided direction to their abandoned children. His daughter would die in a car accident before George passed away. George slipped into a coma after a bad fall one evening. His son flew from Miami to see him, but the sight of his father in that condition stuck with him, and he died a few days later, also before George. George was the last of his nuclear family, which started out of spite. He never awoke from his coma and died in September of 1998. Part 3. Ida Mae Gladney.
Oh.
Remember, she's our lady.
Our lady.
Our Chicago lady.
Right.
Chicago, October 1937. The train station felt busier than their entire hometown. They had to sleep upright and eat whatever they brought with them from home on their way north. Chicago was the first city Ida had ever seen, and it looked like heaven to her. But they were making their way to Milwaukee. Milwaukee, November 1937. Ida Mae's husband, George, began looking for a job. Jobs were hard to come by for Black people, and many were turned away at the door, and some companies publicized the fact that they had never and never would hire Negroes. Ida Mae knew she was pregnant before she left for, Mississippi. However, it was impossible to hide her situation now. She didn't trust doctors in the North. She was told that they strap you to the bed, and she didn't want none of that. So her plan,
true, so I don't want that either. True.
Her plan was to deliver her baby in Mississippi at the hands of a midwife. So she left the North as soon as she arrived, but by coming with her husband and making sure that they at least got settled with her sister and her sister's husband, she solidified the fact that George, her husband, could not leave her in the South, as so many husbands had left their wives.
And just forgot about him.
So that choice kept their family together forever. So Ida Mae had her baby in Mississippi as she had planned. But when she returned north, it was not to Milwaukee. Her husband had never found work and instead had moved to Chicago. They lived in a basement flat before moving to the top floor of a 3-flat building in Bronzeville. They didn't know it, but they were living in one of the most segregated cities in the nation, a position that Chicago would hold for decades, that you and I definitely see now.
Yep, still today.
Sunday, July 27th, 1919, a Black boy named Eugene Williams was swimming. Don't know where that came from. Was swimming along on a raft in Lake Michigan when he crossed an invisible race line and was drowned by white boys who threw rocks at him. Blacks demanded that the white police officer on the scene arrest the boys. The police officer refused and instead arrested a black man based on a white man's accusation at the scene. This began the worst race riot Chicago has ever seen. 2 white men were killed walking through a black neighborhood. 2 black men were killed walking through a white neighborhood. A white laundromat worker was killed. Another white peddler was killed. White people dragged. Okay. Black people off of public transportation and beat them. White gangs stormed the Black Belt and Bronzeville, setting homes on fire. The riots lasted for 13 days and killed 38 people, 23 black and 15 white. It didn't end until a state militia subdued it. Riots were to the north what lynchings were to the south.
Yeah.
Same thing, new name. Still with Ida Mae, 1938. Her days were spent with her youngest children as her husband, her very pious husband, was at work. And one of her older girls was even in school already. So she was lonely. One day a woman visits bringing wine, a drink Ida had never had. And Ida drank and was drunk when her husband got home. She was drinking it like juice.
Ida was drunk.
Slurring her words. She was so ashamed. Obviously, it was clear to her husband, George, that she needed more worldly knowledge. She needed to be less naive. And this is the thing. The flood of black Southerners threatened this fragile class system amongst black people.
Right.
Many people felt this way. They didn't know how to act.
The list. You remember there's an actual list of things they should not do. Do you have that?
How not to wear soiled clothes on public transportation.
No scarves.
Not hanging out of the windows. Not wearing handkerchiefs or hanging wet clothes on front porches. This is stuff that they used to do in the South, and they brought it to the North, and people was like, what is this country nonsense?
Don't have your events in the front yard. It was a list.
That sounds fun. However,
no.
Black publications tried to publish a list of etiquette rules. Ida was grateful for these tips, honestly, but resolved never to change who she was deep inside. She kept her Southern drawl, refused to change her name, and chose to sang Southern spirituals in church. So Ida Mae was going to stay Ida Mae. She might class it up a little for you.
Just a little bit.
Only if she wanted to. Back home, you could get killed for trying to vote or even more likely turned away from the polls. In this atmosphere, though, open members of the Klan rose to positions in Senate, reinforcing white supremacy and denying the ban of even lynching. By the way, footnote, lynching was only successfully made a federal crime last month, Alexis.
Yeah.
Yeah, over 6 decades after Emmett Till.
It's been presented more than once.
Yeah.
And
failed repeatedly. However, in the North, blacks were being courted by white Democratic politicians who saw these new migrants as their opportunity. Ida voted for the first time and Roosevelt won his 3rd term. Chicago, 1939. It was terribly difficult for her husband, George, to find work. He had even worked on the back of a truck that delivered ice. Many companies said that they would hire black workers. However, they couldn't because their white workers would storm out. And they were likely telling the truth. As it turns out, Jim Crow in the South was affecting the entire economy of the nation because lower to middle class whites couldn't ask for more money, knowing that there was this cheap labor out there that had no choice but to work for pennies. And black people were always going to be paid significantly less. So if you want to argue, we'll just give your job to a colored worker. Northern factory owners understood this and used black workers to break strike lines. Therefore, Jim Crow was hurting everybody's pockets. This also solidified a wide wealth division amongst the races. White workers mostly took professional jobs so as to not compete with workers of color, and black workers were forced to stay in menial and unskilled employment. George finally did find work at a Campbell soup plant. 1939, Ida Mae. Black women were at the bottom of the economic hierarchy in the North. They were the last to be hired even after foreign immigrants. And so many had to resort to a slave market. Do you remember what that is?
Yeah.
It's similar to what you might find at like a Home Depot now, where people are just waiting in line for work and you go and you bid on jobs.
So I feel like when I lived in Georgia, I was like 18, 19
you did this.
years old.
Yeah.
And I did that. You would just go and kind of hang out in front of this.
And can I just say, you are not 60 years old.
No.
This is a thing right now.
I was 19. I was 18.
And you were picking strawberries?
Yeah, we went into, I think it was fruit and vegetables in this plant that we went to. And we just get dropped back off when the work is done.
Yeah.
And I would go out there several times a week. And that's how I got my work until I got a real job. Well, not a real job, but a
steady job. Sure. One day, Ida found out that a husband and his wife on the far north side of town was looking for a girl to replace their cleaning lady. Their cleaning lady was like out of town for a couple weeks. And so Ida was like, I'd be happy to take your position. When she arrived, it was more money. It was, steady. Yeah. When she arrived, the wife worked in the floor under the apartment. And the husband was in bed when Ida arrived, which she thought was weird, but she just started about her business. Ida's really about minding her business.
I like her.
Yeah, me too. I like her a lot.
Minding my business.
When the man came out of his room, he propositioned Ida Mae. So the man comes out of his...
What you say now?
I know. It's shameful.
Very
so the man
shameful.
comes out of his room and he's like, the other girl just stays in bed with me all day. And then I'll clean the apartment when she leaves. Yeah. You can do that while she out of town.
No.
Ida Mae stiffens up and said, I'm here to clean. She cleaned that one day and missed out on the rest of the week's pay, but she didn't care. She was both mad at the man and the girl who had recommended the job. She couldn't wrap her mind around how you could do something so degrading.
Yeah.
She did eventually settle into a job as a hospital aide with an excellent bedside manner at a local facility. Ida, being from Mississippi, went to the funeral of Mamie Till's son. Mamie Till had sent her son to Mississippi, and he came back disfigured, swollen. Emmett Till is his name. It could have been Ida's son laying in that casket with an eye hanging out of his socket. You want to hear about Cicero? You know about Cicero, right? Cicero is historic, world renowned for being crazy racist.
Yep.
Until eventually it succumbed to its own corruption and all the racist white people moved out and all the mostly Hispanic immigrants moved in. And so now, it's just Cicero. But look up Cicero. It's crazy. Moving on.
Yeah.
1966.
Movies about it and stuff.
Yeah. There's so much information out there. Ida Mae, 1966, sees a man speaking and he's saying something good and she wants to get closer to him, but the crowd is crazy and the atmosphere feels vaguely dangerous. And Ida Mae is about good sense. So she decides, I'm just going to listen a little bit and I'm going to go home with my baby. That man was Dr. Martin Luther King.
Say it again.
Yeah. He was a celebrated and awarded leader of the civil rights movement. And unlike Jim Crow in the South, King was in the North now fighting a feeling. It's so difficult to do. It was a tougher dragon to slay. In some ways, the North was even more violent than the South at this time. 1967, nearly 30 years since moving north, Ida and George felt like they still hadn't settled. They were renting. They didn't own a home. And they found one eventually in South Shore, which is a delightful white neighborhood. Within a year after they moved to the South Shore neighborhood, it went from mostly white to mostly black.
She said
white flight is what it's called.
Morning, and they was just gone.
The house was gone. Someone had actually moved their house, and across the street was just land and like a hole.
That was crazy.
Due to its beautiful architecture, Hyde Park was one of the rare neighborhoods that truly integrated. You might know that Barack and Michelle had a home there. Whites didn't want to give up those homes, and they were too heavy to just pick up and move. Okay, so Ida participates in the neighborhood's regular meetings with local police and aldermen, and in these meetings, the old school migrants share their gripes with the local prostitutes and drug peddlers. During one of their meetings, a young senator joins them. This is rare because the only one who really cared was the alderman, and he was getting like publicity for it.
He came with a crew.
Yeah, with media.
Yeah.
So this young senator shows up. The man's wife, whose parents were migrants, grew up in Ida's South Shore neighborhood. It was unusual for senators to participate. And he especially was unusual because he came without cameras or media, like we said. He gave them his contact info and told them how he could help, how his office could help move things along if needed. He left and they thought, well, he's nice. Back to business. That was Barack Obama. And he would become 10 years later the first Black president of the United States.
Right.
Now we get to the end of Ida's story. Ida moved to the north with the lowest of expectations out of our three distinguished citizens. And she also had the least amount of opportunities of the three. In the end, though, her life was the happiest. And what's more, she outlasted all of them. She died peacefully in her sleep in September of 2004. She was in her room in her 3-flat home, filled with her children and grandchildren who all loved her and kept close to her and kept her bedroom as it was when she was alive in memory of her. And because they didn't have the strength or the heart to disturb the room where their beloved Grammy Ida Mae slept. Yeah. So that's Warmth of Other Suns. Can we take a break?
Yep.
Well, I called my Dr. Foster, and when the girl answered the phone, I got a funny feeling the way she said Dr. Foster had gone. She said he left with a lady patient about 24 hours ago. I added 2 and 2, and here's what I got. I'll never see that girl no more. Well, I ain't seen her, now have my baby since that day. Yeah. I ain't seen her, now have my baby.
The lazy, laughing South with blood on its mouth. The sunny-faced South, beast-strong, idiot-brained, the child-minded South. Scratching in the dead fire's ashes for a Negro's bones. Cotton and the moon, warmth, earth, warmth, the sky, the sun, the stars, the magnolia-scented South. Beautiful like a woman, seductive as a dark-eyed whore, passionate, cruel, honey-lipped, syphilitic. That is the South, and I, who am Black, would love her. But she spits in my face, and I, who am Black, would give her many rare gifts. But she turns her back upon me, so now I seek the North, the cold-faced North. For she, they say, is a kinder mistress, and in her house my children may escape the spell of the South. The South by Langston Hughes. And we're back.
Okay, we are. What a story.
Yeah. What did you think of The Warmth of Other Suns? And would you recommend this book?
Okay, I got to tell you, it was long. It was long. And I
This
listened.
episode or the book?
The book.
Or both?
Okay, I'll say both. But the book was long, but it has so much information in it. I learned so much in the telling of these stories. I was moved by the way she retold these personal stories and included events about factual moments that were occurring at that time.
Mm-hmm.
As I was listening, I could remember wondering, is she going to include this? This kind of happened around that time. And then a few sentences later,
she would bring it up.
She would bring it up. So I feel like it was very well written and worth reading more than once, so you can just fully digest the stories and hear the themes of their struggles as they're coping with the life they had in the South and this new life in the West or North or East of where they were. So I really appreciated it. It was well written, and I would definitely read it again. It made me wish I had an opportunity to learn more about my family's history. Oh, that's my take. How about you? What's your final verdict, and what do you recommend it?
It can be hard to write a book of a historical nature and to provide enough context where a novice can pick it up and understand fully the depth of it. I thought Isabel Wilkerson did an amazing job of giving you context along with the stories.
Yep.
In the epilogue, she tells us the lengths she went through to verify what was told to her. She even took a drive that Dr. Foster made from Louisiana to California. She did that with her parents.
Yeah.
And her mom was going, you can really see how he would be delirious here and imagine what he felt here. And she really took her time with this book. She did just an excellent job.
She really
You don't
did.
have to know anything about American history, about Black Americans to pick up this book and be fully educated on the Great Migration.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would say I would definitely recommend this book. I loved it. It's one of my favorite books that we've read. I can't think of one I love more. I love this. I love this. These stories will stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
Ida Mae reminds me so much of some of the women in my family.
Yeah.
I loved it. I love this book.
Yeah. Ida Mae was great.
Yeah.
I feel like, I loved them all because they had so much to give. They wanted so much. I won't say that about Ida Mae because she was just kind of living her life.
Yeah.
And
her devotion was to her husband. She waited on him hand and foot.
What were they married? 47 years? Yeah. But the other guys, Dr. Foster and
George
Sterling, they had these things they were trying to fulfill and prove. Yeah. Which made life a little difficult for them.
Yeah.
Whereas Ida Mae did not have that.
She didn't have a whole jury that was always trying to say that her decisions were right or wrong.
Right.
She was just so humble.
Yeah.
And she had such common sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So in the end, I felt like as far as the purpose of our life is concerned, what matters in the end is how we what matters. Go ahead.
Is it how we deal with the things that are in front of us? Because her approach to things allowed her to get through life without so much of I need to prove something to somebody
without
else.
bitterness. She didn't hold grudges. And the happy moments she could taste even more.
Yeah.
We could talk about this book forever.
Yeah. And there's so much to it. We didn't hit all the.
No, when you read this book,
there.
it's going to open up. It's going to be a new book for you.
Yeah.
When
so much to be told.
Yeah. When
So
each
many
individual
stories.
person reads it, and to sacrifice everything, come up north, running for your life, only for your children to be your biggest disappointment in life, to be on drugs, to not have your work ethic, to not even really know you.
Yeah.
And that's a story that a lot of migrants from other countries and from the South can relate to. You spending your life working and trying to make this foundation. And sometimes, your children they get lost.
Yeah. Sometimes it really boils down to a lack of appreciation.
Yeah.
George worked so hard and he felt like, and then he also wasn't there to give his children.
He was on the railroad
because he was trying so hard to provide. One of the other things I liked, and I'll just keep this my last thing, but how she talked about immigrants from other country and how their life kind of compared to the lives of these.
The stories, the themes are the same.
Yes, exactly.
But it tastes different because Black people in America are still never without that residual taste from slavery.
And not only that, the white immigrants, they could change their name. They could drop something off and they'd be a whole
drop a vowel
person.
And maybe you were a wasp.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yep. It was just so easy for them, whereas we still had the color of our skin.
Yeah. One thing,
Exactly.
Dr. Foster's grandson turned down Princeton and Harvard to attend Yale. And Dr. Foster was so proud, but at that time he was too sick to even go to grandson's high school graduation. But he was proud. It was like his life's work had a culminated to this.
And they had generations of college-bound students in their family members. So
but they weren't the happiest. No. Ida was the happiest.
That's right. His mom wanted him so much for him and
to be a surgeon. Yeah.
So she too would have really appreciated the success that her great grandson was at. So
Yep.
That was it. So what are we reading next week, Kari?
Then There Were None by Agatha Christie.
Yes. Thank you for listening to Lit Society.
Yeah.
This part 2
Thanks
version
for sticking it out.
of The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. It was great. Thank you, guys. We'll be here next week, Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And
we know you stuck in the house, so just listen to this episode again.
Right.
You got the time.
Mm-hmm. Go back to part 1. Take that in.
Telecommuting, throw this on.
Mm-hmm. Go
We'll
to
be
part
here
2.
for you. Mm-hmm.
Play us. Again, we'll be here. Hey. Lit Society is brought to you by Alexis Honoria and Kari Herrera.
That's me.
Support the cause by leaving a 5-star review.
Do it now.
For our show on Apple Podcasts, along with a comment about why you absolutely love us, because we love you too.
We really love you guys.
We do. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please tell a friend, share it with a friend, please. Start there. And then visit us at litsocietypod.com for show notes, this month's book list, and to sign up for our amazing email newsletter.
Oh, it's great.
And until next time, friends, read something.